What's happening, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and in my previous video I mentioned that I have been sick for the last few days, so that's why I'm not looking or sounding like I'm 100% right now, and I just finished talking for like 10 minutes about a review that you guys saw yesterday, so that's why I sound like I do and look like I do. So anyway, let me just get right into today's review. Uncanny X-Men Volume 1, Revolution, written by Brian Michael Bendis and drawn by Chris Bachalo and Fraser Irving. This collects the first 5 issues of Brian Michael Bendis' Uncanny X-Men run, which is the current Uncanny X-Men series. And I am extremely hit or miss with Brian Michael Bendis. There are things that he has done that I've hated. Most of what I've read from him I have hated, and a few things from him I really like. The rule of thumb for me is that when he's able to play in his own little world and he doesn't have other people doing things that are connected to what he's doing, usually he produces something really good. For example, Ultimate Spider-Man. For the most part, I really loved his Ultimate Spider-Man stuff, what I've read. I haven't read that much, probably the first 5 years of his Ultimate Spider-Man run, and he's still writing Ultimate Spider-Man now, so it's been like 15 years. But for the most part, I really loved his Ultimate Spider-Man. But then, when you get into the main Marvel Universe, where there are like 100 other creators doing stuff, and it connects to what Bendis is doing, and what he does connects to what other people have done and are doing, it doesn't work as well. Usually, it's not nearly as good as when he's able to just play in his own little sandbox and do whatever he wants. And I'm going to go ahead and say the same is true for this. I really like this for the most part. I'm going to go ahead and say the story is very minimal. There's hardly any story here at all for 5 issues. What Bendis does, almost each issue here focuses on a different character. There's one issue that kind of focuses on Magic, Illyana Rasputin. There's one issue that kind of sort of focuses on Emma Frost, and then there's an issue that focuses on one of the new mutants who has gotten her powers after the events of Avengers vs. X-Men. Her name is Tempest, and there's an issue that kind of focuses on her. But the difference between what Bendis does here and what, say, Jason Aaron does in Wolverine and the X-Men, Jason Aaron would have an entire issue that would focus on Idie or Brew or Iceman or one of the characters in his cast of characters, and by the end of that issue I would feel like I knew more about that character. He did an issue that kind of focused on Shark Girl, and after that issue I felt like I knew who Shark Girl was as a person. I knew stuff about her that you didn't know before that issue. And the problem with the way Bendis does it, after the issue that kind of focuses on Tempest, I still don't really know that much about the character of Tempest. She's Australian. That's about all I know. And she likes the character of Captain America. There's not really a whole lot. This doesn't really delve into the characters like I would really think it does, especially since there's so very little story here. If you're going to do 5 issues and you're barely going to have any story at all, then I would think that you would need to make up for that by having the issues really delve into these characters and let us get to know these characters a lot more. You've got characters here like Triage. I don't know anything about Triage as a person. He acts entirely differently here than he did in Volume 1 of All New X-Men. And then you've got another guy, the Chameleon guy. I don't even remember his name, which should tell you just how very little this book actually does with him. And then you've got a character who is tentatively being called Gold Balls because these golden balls shoot off of him, and that's his mutant power. His basic personality trait is that he's kind of overwhelmed by all of this. And none of these characters feel very three-dimensional at all. The only ones that kind of feel fleshed out are the ones who have had decades of stories about them where other writers have fleshed them out. So Cyclops, Magic, Magneto, and Emma Frost, they all feel very real and three-dimensional for the most part because they are not brand new characters that Brian Michael Bendis is failing to flesh out and make feel like real people. That's the big problem with these new characters in this book, is that after 5 issues or after $25, you don't really get a whole lot of stuff about these characters. You don't really come away from it feeling like you know who these characters are. And like I said, the story here is very bare. Basically, what happens is we find out that the American government wants to take Cyclops in. They want to arrest him because in the events of Avengers vs. X-Men, Cyclops was possessed by the Phoenix Force and he murdered Charles Xavier. And so the American government and the Avengers want to arrest him. And at first, it appears that Magneto is going to betray Cyclops because Magneto is on Cyclops' team, and it looks like Magneto is going to betray him and kind of work with the government to take him down. But then we find out, no, Magneto is actually playing the American government, and he's actually just pretending like he's their mole so that he can get information from them and they will trust him. And that's an okay little twist, but personally, I think it would have been more interesting to have Magneto be the guy who says that Scott Summers is a monster, kind of flip their roles, because traditionally Magneto is the bad guy and Cyclops is the good guy. And I think it would have been more interesting to have Magneto be the one that says Cyclops has gone too far, and Cyclops be the one who really can't see that. I think that would have been more of an interesting dichotomy than having Magneto say, just kidding, I'm not really a traitor, even though we spent 2 issues thinking that he was a traitor to Cyclops. Other than that, they go to Australia to tell Tempest's mom that Tempest is okay, and then they go to the Jean Grey School to recruit some of the students there. And that's about it. Not a whole lot happens here. The final issue shows that Magic has a little battle with Dormammu, who is a Doctor Strange villain. Nothing really happens in this book, and that's really sad for me to say because I enjoyed this. I enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed a lot of what happened here. Part of that is that I love Chris Bachalo's artwork, or Bachalo. I've always said Bachalo, but then recently I've heard people say Bachalo, so I don't know how it's pronounced, but I love his artwork, and he really makes this book come alive for me. I really love the designs of these characters for the most part. The one design that I am not sold on is Emma Frost. She has always been the White Queen, and she always wears white. Well, now she wears black. She wears all black. There she is right behind Cyclops, and every time that she is on screen, I keep thinking, is that Magic or is that Emma Frost? And the only way that you can really tell them apart is that Magic has bangs that are all cut short like that, and she has longer hair than Emma Frost. But it's really hard for me to tell them both apart. Sometimes Magic is holding her sword, sometimes she's not. There's at least one time where Emma Frost says something, and I would swear that's something that Magic would have said because it doesn't sound like something Emma Frost would say. And again, that comes from Brian Michael Bendis. He doesn't really have a good handle on character in this book. He doesn't really make the new characters come alive, and the old characters, sometimes he gives them dialogue that doesn't sound right coming from them. And so I really do wish that Chris Bachalo had given Emma Frost a different costume. Still let her keep the white costume. Even if you want to redesign her costume, give her a different costume, just as long as it stays white so that the White Queen makes sense. I think it's really dumb that the White Queen is dressed in black. Whatever. Like I said, I enjoyed reading this book. I had a lot of fun when I was reading it, but just based on this being a single unit of entertainment where if you go to the store and you pick this up, you want it to be a story that exists on its own, and this is not that. This is part of a story. This is like 1/12 of a story, and I assume 10 years from now, when Brian Michael Bendis is completely done writing All New X-Men and Uncanny X-Men, I will be able to go back and read all of his All New X-Men and Uncanny X-Men, and it will feel more complete. There will be more of a story there because you're able to read like 50 times what you're getting here, and there's more story in 50 times 5 than there is in just 5 issues. That's kind of a problem. It's not really a good thing that Brian Michael Bendis is decompressing his series so much, but that's Brian Michael Bendis. He does that all the time, and it's something that I kind of expected to happen, but you know what? It really shouldn't be the norm, but it is. Another thing that I want to complain about, and this has to do with people who are saying, yeah, Cyclops was right. Cyclops is awesome. I'm all for Cyclops. And then you've got the people who say, yeah, Wolverine was right. I'm all for Wolverine. Reading this book made me realize that both of those types of people are wrong. And here's why. When reading Jason Aaron's Wolverine and the X-Men, you get the sense that things are pretty peachy for mutant kind, and they're pretty okay. You've got a school that is public knowledge, everyone in the world knows about it, and mutants are going to the school, and nothing really bad is happening to them. You've got the Hellfire Club trying to kill them, but that's just a day in the life of the X-Men. And then you've got the X-Men stuff written by Brian Michael Bendis, where people are getting mutant powers, and the police are arresting these mutants just for being mutants. And it made me realize that Brian Michael Bendis, again, remember what I said at the very beginning of my video, that Brian Michael Bendis, he does really good when he's playing in his own sandbox that nobody else is playing in. In his X-Men world, All New X-Men and Uncanny X-Men, things are very different for the mutant race than they are in books happening at the exact same time written by other people. And it's totally inconsistent. And this is a problem that I don't really see Marvel being able to fix. What happened was Jason Aaron was writing Wolverine and the X-Men for a year or so before Brian Michael Bendis came on and was writing All New X-Men and Uncanny X-Men. And basically, Brian Michael Bendis is like an A-list writer. No matter if I like him or not, and I really don't, he is an A-list writer. And so when he comes in and says, I'm going to write X-Men, Marvel is going to say, okay, you can do whatever you want, and they're not going to say, hey, you really can't do this, you really shouldn't do that. He's going to do whatever he wants. And so he comes into the X-Men, and Jason Aaron has been writing X-Men for like a year and a half, and then Brian Michael Bendis says, okay, as of now, mutants are arrested on sight for being mutants. And it feels like his X-Men books, All New X-Men and Uncanny X-Men, take place in an entirely different world than Wolverine and the X-Men or any of the other X-Men books, and that's kind of a problem. In this world, it totally makes sense that Cyclops is right. He makes some very good points that the Avengers are not going to fight for mutant rights because they haven't been. They've been standing by idly while police officers are attacking mutants for doing nothing. And so in this world, it makes a lot of sense for Cyclops to kind of be this revolutionary, which I'm going to get to that in a minute. It makes a lot of sense for Cyclops to be fighting against the authorities because in this world, the authorities are the bad guys. But then in X-Men books that are allegedly supposed to take place in the same world, written by Jason Aaron, those same things are not happening. And it really feels like these books are supposed to be set in entirely different worlds, but they're not. And it's totally inconsistent, like I said. And that's really a bad thing. Marvel really should have come to Bendis and said, listen, you've got mutants being arrested just for being mutants over here, but in all of the other X-Men books that we've got going on, that's not a thing. So maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe you should get together with Jason Aaron, and you two should kind of get this vision that's kind of consistent among all of your books so that you can kind of present this unified world that all of these stories are allegedly taking place in. And they don't do that, so Jason Aaron's Wolverine and the X-Men feels very different than Brian Michael Bendis' Uncanny X-Men or his All New X-Men. And so that's a problem. That is a big problem. If you aren't reading any other X-Men, if you are just reading Brian Michael Bendis, then that's fine. This isn't going to feel out of place because this is the only X-Men that you're going to be reading. And if you're not reading Bendis' stuff, then it's going to be fine because the X-Men are going to feel like they've never been happier before. And they've got a school and they're teaching and everything is fine and dandy. But the problem comes when you try and read these books as if they exist in the same world, which allegedly they do. And then the problem is going to come even doubly so when all of these books cross over with each other, and then it's going to be really tonally jarring for the people who are only reading Bendis' X-Men books to suddenly get kind of step their toes into this other world where Bendis' rules do not apply, and for the people who have only been reading Wolverine and the X-Men, and for them to suddenly step their toes into this world where the rules no longer apply. And that is a huge problem, and I do not like that. And again, I think it's because Bendis is an A-list writer, and when he comes into the X-Men, he's going to do whatever he wants, and he's not really going to pay any attention to any of the stuff that any of the other writers are doing. And again, he's playing to his strengths because he does his best work when he doesn't have anyone else to have to worry about. The problem is, this is not that thing. This is set in a very large world with like five other X-Men books. And so he has to pay attention to those things, or he does something that feels totally inconsistent with those other books. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is Cyclops trying to start the mutant revolution, which, what does that even mean? Now, after X-Men Schism, basically there were two ideologies going on with the X-Men. You had Wolverine taking about half of the X-Men, and they went back to New York, and they started a school, and basically all of these people are saying that they are not going to send kids out into the battlefield to kill people. They are going to keep kids in school and teach them to be kids. And then Cyclops is saying, no, we need to use kids because kids are dispensable, and if they die, oh well, as long as they die serving the cause, then it's okay. And that was basically the two ideologies. Well then, after Avengers vs. X-Men, suddenly Cyclops has changed his mind. Suddenly, it's very important that they start a school again, but they've already got a school in New York, and Cyclops apparently doesn't think that that's good enough, so he started his own school in the Weapon X headquarters, and he's saying, okay, it's really important that we teach these kids, even though, like, a week ago he was saying that kids don't need to be taught, and they need to go out into the field of battle and fight. And then he keeps saying, he says like 2 or 3 times, once we've taught these kids, we're going to start a mutant revolution. What does that even mean? Does that mean that Cyclops is planning on, like, killing all the humans and letting the mutants just rule the planet? Does it mean that the humans are going to be the slaves to the mutants? I don't understand what this means, and I don't even think that Brian Michael Bendis understands what it means, because we have Cyclops, he says it 2 or 3 times. He says, we're going to have a mutant revolution, but nobody ever explains what does that mean exactly. When Magneto was having his own little revolution, and he was a bad guy, and the X-Men were always fighting him, you knew what the stakes were. Magneto would say, when I win, mutants are going to be superior over humans, and humans are going to be inferior to mutants, and you knew what he was fighting for. With Cyclops, I have no idea, and I don't know if it's explained in Avengers vs. X-Men, or if it's explained in Avengers vs. X-Men Consequences, or All New X-Men Volume 2, which I haven't read. I don't know if it's explained there or not. If it is, that's a failure on this book, because this book, like 3 times, mentions this mutant revolution, but then it doesn't explain what that means. And I know what a revolution means. It's when people revolt against something. But what is Cyclops revolting against? Because right now, all we see him doing is saving mutants who are in danger from humans. But then he says, after we save these mutants and we train them and teach them, we're going to have a mutant revolution. Okay, what are the specifics of that revolution? I would really like to know, and if we did, maybe I could understand these characters a little better. But again, it all comes back to Brian Michael Bendis. He doesn't understand character. He doesn't give us enough character moments in this book with the old characters like Cyclops, Magneto, Emma Frost, or Magic, or the new characters like Golden Balls, or Triage, or Tempest. We don't get enough character moments here. And when you have a character who allegedly has an ideology, like we're going to have a mutant revolution, that doesn't really mean anything. They keep saying it, but they don't really explain what that means. And that's a huge problem here. I know it sounded like I really hated this book, and I had a lot of problems. I mean, just about everything that I said in this video was a problem that I had with this book. And this book is not without its problems. It does have a lot of problems. I'm not just nitpicking because I don't like Brian Michael Bendis. I ordered this on purpose. I went into this wanting to love it, and I enjoyed it, but it does have a lot of problems. And if you are interested in the X-Men, the only way that I could suggest that you read this is if you don't have a history with the X-Men. If you haven't read a lot of other X-Men stuff, if you've never read anything X-Men related, I would recommend that maybe you read this. You would probably have to go and read All New X-Men also, because this references stuff that's happening in that title, and you basically just have to read both series and kind of pretend like they're one series. That's another problem that I have with Bendis' run here. He acts like people who are reading Uncanny X-Men already know what's going on in All New X-Men, and that's not necessarily the case. I've only read 1 volume of All New X-Men, and this is referencing stuff that happens in Volume 2 of that series, and I really feel like what Bendis should have done, he should have had 1 X-Men series where all of the events of All New X-Men and Uncanny X-Men are happening in 1 book. And that way, someone like me who is coming to the party really late and is only reading the trades, they can just buy the trades in the order that they're supposed to buy them. See, this one says number 1 on it. I can just buy the trades in the order that they're supposed to be read in, and then I don't have to be confused about what happens when, and am I supposed to read this book before or after All New X-Men Volume 2? I don't have to worry about that because all of the Bendis stuff is just happening in 1 series. I really wish that something like that was happening here, but instead, now I have to try and figure out, okay, am I supposed to read this before that? Am I supposed to read that before this? And it's a little confusing. For the most part, this does a decent job of trying to catch up the reader, but there is some stuff here that if you haven't read All New X-Men, you are going to be confused. And I've read 1 volume of that series, and I was a little bit confused. So if you have never read any X-Men before at all, and you want to, this would be an okay book to read in conjunction with All New X-Men. But if you like the X-Men, if you're like me and you like reading X-Men, this is probably going to be disappointing. But then again, I say that, and I've seen a whole bunch of people who claim to be X-Men fans, and they really love this stuff. So maybe I'm just the only one who doesn't like it. But for me, I feel like the problems that I had here that I talked about in this video were really valid. Maybe they're not. Maybe everyone is going to get on their keyboards and say, no, you're an idiot. This is why this book is awesome. Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And that's about all I have to say in this video about this book. I will see you guys tomorrow with another kind of video. So until then, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.